Hi, I'm Derek Wilson, and welcome to The Conversation. There are times in life when you just have to have the conversation. The conversation about sex, sexuality, gender expression, and how we stay healthy through it all. Listen, the conversation is sometimes awkward, sometimes uncomfortable, sometimes confusing, but it's always real and it's always necessary if we're gonna make healthy changes. So let's stop HIV by having the conversation. Today we're having the conversation about trans men and the sexual health needs of trans men. So let's start with this. How about if I go around and everyone give me your name, where you're from, and when did you start transitioning? And let's start from my left.
Hey Derek, thanks for having me. My name is Jamel Ashley Ware. I'm from Detroit, Michigan, and I started my transition about 6 years ago after I finished my undergraduate career.
Cool.
My name is Manesh Chapman. I actually grew up here in Georgia, in Loganville. I started my transition November of 2016.
Cool.
I'm Jamil Jacobrew. I'm from Miami, Florida. I moved to Macon, Georgia 2 years ago, and 6 months I moved to Atlanta, Georgia. I started natural transitioning in 2014 and medically transitioning in 2016.
Cool.
Hello, I'm Amir Dapatry. Basically, I was born in Atlanta, not really, but I'm from Atlanta. And then, medically speaking, I started about 2013. I think that's a good number.
Cool.
I'm Roy Saul, originally from Salisbury, Maryland, grew up in Tallahassee, Florida. Medically transitioning, I'm relatively new to it as far as identity and the association of identity and transitioning as it is many years ago.
Great.
Hello, I'm D. Jamel Young from Brooklyn, New York. I am the member leader of Transforming, which is a trans-masculine-led organization in which I joined about 9 years ago and started my transition.
Cool. So when I think about myself, and I can certainly understand what it means for me to be Black, what it means for me to be tall, what it means for me to be a man even. Royce, what does it mean for you to be a trans man?
Let's see. To be a trans man, for me, it's probably, I can't, for me, trans man, because of how long I've been self-aware, it's more so been a matter of recognition. So my earliest memories have only been male memories. There hasn't been anything that I've moved from and into. It's just more so evolution. So as far as trans man, for me, I usually use trans man to make it as simple for someone to understand as possible. But as far as my everyday identity is simply man or male.
To be male or man. Does anybody else have a sense of what it means to be a trans man?
Yes, because I'm kind of backing what he was just saying in terms of, the transition is the part of the journey, kind of like, how it's part of the journey from boy to man. It's part of the journey to be a trans man from female to male. It's female to male, not necessarily man. You know what I mean? As a man, you stand in your manhood as a man. So it's kind of hard to say, about what it means to be a trans man, aside from that's just the best way to describe it.
Best way to describe it. So is there a difference for you between trans man or man, or are they just interchangeable terms?
They're interchangeable. When I look at myself, I just see a man. But when I have to explain to someone my identity, then I use the word trans man. And really, I only actually prefer to use the word trans man when it has something to do with intimacy, because it's important for my partner to know what they're getting into. I've always seen myself as a man. I think many trans men feel that way. To be identified as a trans man simply means that the world now recognizes you as you've seen yourself.
So in terms of sexuality, because there's gender expression and then there's sexuality, how would you explain your sexuality? If someone were to ask, and how does your sexuality play into your sexual health needs?
Okay. Gender identity and sexuality are two different arenas. How I identify myself has nothing to do with who I'm attracted to, and furthermore, who I sleep with. And the second part of your question, how does my sexuality play into my sexual health needs, is we have the same risk factors.
Mm-hmm.
We're all human beings having sex and interacting with each other, always having the risk of exposing ourselves to different diseases, just as any other man.
Jamel Jack.
Well, my sexuality is pansexual. I date more on the person's personality and an emotional connection than the appearance. I am married 2 years with a trans woman, and that was after I started transitioning, I met her.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I would tell young trans men that who you are is important to the world. And it's all right to be yourself. And everyone may not understand the journey, but it's yours to live, so live it.
Manesh, there are a lot of assumptions and stereotypes as it relates to dating trans men. How do these assumptions or stereotypes really hinder or help the development of healthy relationships that you may have?
A lot of people, first let me say that everyone likes what they like. No one should be judged by what it is that they desire. That's their own business. There are trans men who enjoy being with trans women, and that is wonderful. But a lot of people assume that that's everyone. And sometimes that kind of creates a problem within that it's not purposely done. It's just from lack of understanding. So as far as relationships go, I think that if we get an understanding of what it is that we want from one another or don't want from one another, then I feel like it would be a lot more comfortable amongst everyone.
Can I build on that? Some of the stigmas and stereotypes dating trans men are that we're heterosexual, that we only deal with cisgender women. And then for those that are maybe more fluent with their sexuality, that only trans guys only get penetrated. So it's like people just assume. People take their own expectations of what we are and just kind of create their own picture of us. It can really go either way.
So, do you feel that trans men get the same level of attention as trans women when it comes to their sexual health needs?
No, I don't.
Why is that?
I have been actually on that journey to find the answer to that, and it's honestly, I don't have a solid answer, but I can say that we all notice that we don't get as much help, whether it be lesbians notice it, whether it be trans women notice it. If you notice that we're not getting what it is that we need, help us so that we can get what it is that we need.
Do you feel that trans men get the same level of attention?
Trans men definitely don't get the same attention as trans women, but I believe most of that has to do with visibility. We are fortunate to be able to live stealth lives where we don't go detected. And I think because of not being detected and a lot of times our own unwillingness to show up and have the conversation for ourselves, it leaves us left out of the conversation.
What is stealth for you? And then how does someone living stealth impact their ability to get or go after health services?
So someone's stealth is someone who blends into society without disclosing the fact that they're trans, just plain living their life as a perceived cisgender person. That could impact and affect the way you get medical services, if you even get services, because in order to get the type of services you need, at some point you would need to disclose. And if that is a issue for you, that may be one of the things that keep you from going. Also, if you are a stealth, you may not be willing to use the language that you need to help someone understand the services that you need to help you.
What do you think is the temptation to live stealth, and is there judgment for trans men who decide to live stealth and not necessarily identify as trans men?
I believe that with society, especially with trans men against trans men, those who are visible does judge on those who are self. But you can be self for many reasons. Maybe the state that you live in, is a higher risk for trans men to get murdered, killed, or abused, or whatever the case may be in that state. And some people choose to go self because of that reason. I believe that if you're going self, you have a reason behind it. I don't judge on it, but there is in the community they do judge on it.
Jamel, you lead an organization for trans men by trans men. What's the temptation for you to live stealth?
Stealth, a lot of times, just being. It's not necessarily identifying. And so some people could say, I'm stealth, just because I don't announce it everywhere. But if the conversation came up, I would. And I do, but as a teachable moment. So I use my stealthiness to get people in and to see us as regular people, and to interact with us and to respect me, to develop a good rapport. And then once I disclose myself, now they have something positive to associate to transgender.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I want to tell young trans men that, one, you aren't a mistake. You are not a mistake. There is nothing wrong about you being intentionally created. There's nothing wrong with your design. Who you are is perfectly assigned and is intentionally assigned. The next thing that I would tell a young trans man is to surround yourself with people who celebrate you and take on that same energy, because there is such a process. I mean, life in itself is a journey, but I can definitely say that sometimes the people that you feel are the closest and who will rally for you and advocate for you aren't always those people when it's time to actually become who you are. Make sure you're aware of your circle and that you're in a place that's going to actually allow you to flourish and foster your growth.
On what level do trans men wanting to live stealth sometimes play into the stigmas and the objectifications that you've all said is just something that is really problematic?
I personally just don't think. I think there's two separate things. Especially for me personally, I'm not intentionally not living my truth. This is my truth. You know what I'm saying? So should I be less passable in order for me not to be objectified? So it's like, that doesn't give people the grounds to question me, to hound me, to cross boundaries. That's really the issue, is when the boundaries are crossed.
Maybe I should better define, because I understand how you define stealth. And so when I think of stealth, I usually tend to think of guys who just don't want to acknowledge that they're trans. They're just I'm a man, that's it. I'm not going to take the trans label. I'm not going to carry the trans flag. I'm a man, that's it. I'm living my life. But can that inadvertently lead to stigma? I mean, think about when it came to gay issues. It used to be the same thing would happen in the 70s and 80s with gay men. But then people started coming out more, and the more men came out, the less gay men got objectified. So how do you think saying, listen, I'm just going to identify as a man, that's it, I'm living my life, no trans stuff, how does that inadvertently play into stigma down the road, potentially? Do you think it does?
I mean, I guess being stealth could play into the stigma, but I want to go back to something that Jamel said. What happened to relationship building? I don't think that many people have problems answering questions with people that they know or they have relationships with. You cannot just meet someone and then expect them to expose their lives. I think that it's dehumanizing. So whether or not someone is stealth or they're out, there needs to be this level of respect for people as human beings. I have some questions for you because you've asked us many questions, but how well do I really know you? So even then, my questions will be more respectful. I'm not going to ask you questions about your body parts or fetishize you because that does happen. It happens a lot. Oh, you're a trans man? Oh, what do you got down there? Are you post or pre-op? Why are we talking about my genitalia? I just met you 30 seconds ago.
I have another one for what you're saying.
Yeah.
I feel like if that person is exhibiting toxic masculinity, then I feel like that's the only way that stealth would really contribute back to it being negative. You know?
What does toxic masculinity mean to you?
It's someone that feels like he is not a man if he does not exemplify these traits of what society has said a man is.
A stereotype. I used to always hear this when I would go out many, many years ago. That if we go to a club and if it's a bunch of gay guys, we're cool. But the moment that real, hard lesbians show up, that a fight is about to happen. That's a stereotype. That they fight a lot because they're trying to project that's what men do. We fight all the time.
Toxic masculinity.
And so is that a real thing? And do trans men sometimes fall into that trap of? And how much of that is testosterone?
Oh man. So masculine lesbians and trans men fall into that stereotype because society portrays masculinity a certain way.
Like we do have on paper hypersexuality, which I know I did. And it's one of those things where you understand more what parts are biologically motivated versus what parts are like somebody being taught something. That's in my personal experience.
What about being accountable of self?
Yes.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I would tell young trans men that transition involves more than just your outer shell.
So, Manesh, what role would you say stigma has played in your seeking HIV testing or any other type of health treatment?
None. Because my health is important to me. If I don't care about myself, nobody else will. I don't care if the doctor doesn't agree with me in my life choices. You have one job to do, and I need you to do that job. Test me for AIDS, test me for HIV, test me for STDs, STIs, test me for everything to make sure that I'm good. So I don't think that anyone should allow what other people think of them to come in between their health. Like this is life or death. So I don't think that a stigma should play any part in it.
So, Jamel Jack, have you ever had to stop and pause before deciding to go to receive any kind of medical care just because you just didn't feel like dealing with all the issues that the medical establishment might give you as a trans man?
I have, and at the beginning of my transition, when I had very high dysphoria, and I hope from going to the doctor not to get misgendered because of the ID still on the female or something like that. Because going in and being questions about my gender identity is always, they kind of push you to the side most of the time, and then when I actually was able to get my gender changed, is the insurance didn't want to cover certain tests that I needed to get because of the body parts I had. So it took me to get change my insurance to actually get the care that I needed.
Right. So you were denied certain tests and certain diagnostics just because of body part issues.
Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think are some challenges that trans men or yourself may have in relates to seeking medical care?
So I actually really didn't think much about medical care until I moved to Atlanta. I recently moved from Madison, Wisconsin, which is a very liberal, much smaller town. And so I knew exactly where to go. I knew who was trans friendly, who was not. And it just was easy that way. But actually recently, this week, I've been having some issues that I really should probably go to the doctor about. But I'm frankly terrified because I've heard many people have terror stories about doctors. Now, I've asked a few trans men, what are the best places for me to go? But it goes back to this ideal of body dysphoria. I am a man, and that's what all of my gender markers say, but I still have some female parts, and those parts still need yearly maintenance. But if a doctor does not understand how to ask a trans patient, how do you define your body, and then they prescribe the language that they want to use, it becomes very uncomfortable.
So how do you navigate seeking gender specific care, or just sitting in a waiting room with a bunch of cisgender men or cisgender women, sorry, and you're there to see the same doctor they're there to see. How do you navigate the weird looks or that you may get? Do you get weird looks in
I'm
that
assuming you're
situation?
talking about gynecology?
Yeah.
Well, I've only had that experience in the beginning of my transition. Right now, my primary care is my primary care.
Okay.
So I'm in the waiting room with everybody.
So you don't go to specialty care?
No.
Okay.
But I don't deal with it. I just walk the world proudly. I've really learned that the more nervous you are, the more timid you are, the more people kind of prey on that. When you present yourself confidently and with conviction, people kind of just respect you. So like when I'm at a doctor and they're confused about my gender mark says M, but when they ask me questions and I'm kind of initiating, my own concerns, I'm just direct about it. I don't want to be around the bush. All right, I'm trans. Yes, I need this test. This is what it is. Do what you got to do from here on. Just be more direct.
Has anyone experienced a problem or a challenge as it relates to gynecological care or just intimidation around that?
I have once. So I'm prior service. I was in the military for 10 years, and I do get my help from the VA. The VA has been wonderful. I will definitely say that. They have been wonderful throughout my entire transition. I can't say that I've had any problems as far as labels and things as that goes. But I will say that before I knew exactly who I am, I still had my beard. I still had a little bit of muscle, but I still needed my parts to be checked. So I had to go to the gynecologist area, and it was filled with only women. And a male doctor came out and he said to me, would you like to move? And I said, no, I'm fine where I'm sitting. And he says, well, I was just, asking because I'm thinking because he's being, courteous. I respect that. Thank you. But his following statement was, well, basically with the way that I look, I'm sitting here with all of these women, how will they feel about that? And I was just like, I didn't really respond. I just kind of looked at him because that was kind of a first time that ever happened to me. But in my mind, I just thought, I'm at the doctor. I'm here to get care. I'm here to get help. I don't care what you people think. I don't care how y'all feel about how I look. I'm not coming into your space. I'm not putting any kind of stress on you. don't worry about me, I won't worry about you. So that from that point, I was like, I'm no longer ever going to feel uncomfortable about going to the doctor again, because this is for me. It's not for anybody else to be comfortable in my space.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I would like to tell young trans men struggling with visibility and the transition to be you unapologetically. Being trans, there is no one way to be it, and that you have the luxury to define what that looks like, and that even surgeries and hormones are just an addition to affirm who you are. Being trans simply just means you do not identify with how you were born or assigned at birth. And like my brother said, surround yourself with a support system, and do your research.
What advice would you give to other trans men regarding just navigating social and medical health needs?
I mean, getting together with other trans men that actually getting the care and reaching out to them and seeing what resources they have so that you can follow and see what trans-friendly doctor there are out there to get the help is what I suggest, being in contact with other trans men.
What advice would you give trans men when it comes to navigating just social and medical needs?
Awesome. Basically, to remember that all of us are starting from different places, and because this is a genetic situation that we're going through, we all have different results. So even if we're not going to look exactly the same, we're not going to have the same growth rate, we're not going to have the same anything. But generally speaking, we're going to have the general and same experiences. So just remember that.
So, Royce, there is, right now, trans issues are big news and really are dominating headlines. And oftentimes, people speaking on behalf of trans communities are in places of privilege that sometimes can cause them to consider things in a certain way. What do you think are some key issues that trans leaders need to really pay attention to when it comes to sexual health needs, particularly of trans men?
Oh, wow. Specifically, I would say actually having the conversations and creating an actual space, especially if you have a large platform, creating the space, a safe space to actually bring up the topics, because oftentimes the topics themselves are not surfaced at all. They may be whispered about. There's something that, is talked about in the shadows, but to actually bring them to the surface as a necessity, oftentimes there's a disconnect. And I think it's important to acknowledge, one, our health needs, and two, the importance of assessing our health. And then two, because it is such a popular topic right now, oftentimes there's more focus put on the sensationalism as opposed to the actual humanism. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of objectifying. Mm-hmm. We're more novelties, mm-hmm, oftentimes than an actual human experience. So setting aside the novelty aspect and actually acknowledging us as humans, we can open up so many doors of conversation that need to take place.
Do others also feel a sense of objectification?
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
And not being seen as fully developed, mm-hmm, individuals and everything else? Anybody else want to talk to what it means to feel objectified?
That's all they see. Sometimes all they see is, wow, you're trans, wow, you're attractive. And that's all great, and I'm flattered, thank you. But I would love to have further conversations about either the topic at hand or me, my life as a person. I really don't like me being trans being the center of attention every single time. Right. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's why most, once someone knows that you're trans, that's all they want to talk about. I lived still for about 3.5 years. I ran a business back in Madison, Wisconsin, and I did that once I start passing because I did not want the topic of conversation to be about my gender. I wanted it to be about my company. I'm here to talk business with you, not about gender identity or sexuality. And it happens, he's right, like it happens all too often where you can be having a conversation about something completely different and then they find out you're trans and that's all they want to fixate on.
Have you ever been in a situation where you really do feel kind of tokenized, or you have to really, you're now put on the spot since you're the one trans person in the room, you have to speak for the entire trans community?
Well, I've been going through the process of trying to get a hysterectomy, right? So going to the doctor, there was a whole bunch of women, of course, when I get there, and I'm the only man there. And the lady, when she takes me to the back to a different waiting room. So when I get inside, instead of her focusing, there was more doctors and nurses there, focusing on my health. Her question was just about trans men and things about that, questions that shouldn't even have come up.
Mm-hmm.
And it took the focus off my health to my gender identity.
So you're there to get served, and you end up having to give a cultural competence lecture and training to your healthcare provider.
Exactly.
Did they pay you?
No.
I'm just saying. Normally,
So it's
trainers
like
get paid.
all these questions about, why did I transition if I got married to a trans woman? Would that still be considered straight? And I'm like, either way, I am a straight man. So it's still, either way, I'm still straight. And I told her gender identity and sexual orientation is two different things. But her focus was, why did I transition if I was still dating an opposite sex?
Mm-hmm. Royce, would you say that most trans men would identify as being straight?
I definitely wouldn't say most, because that would be generalizing a large amount of people. I would definitely say there are variations in the spectrum, and it can't be generalized. So it's even more imperative to have conversations like this where we are discussing sexual health needs as well as gender identity, because not everyone has the same attraction, definitely not the same relationships and interactions. So we all have individual needs and individual desires.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I would tell you, young trans man, to be yourself, do your research, live your life the way you choose to live, and do not compare your transition to the next man, because each journey is different.
How much information do you think trans men have about PrEP?
As far as what?
See, good.
Can I answer that?
Oh, there we go.
Can I answer that? I think there are very little information available for trans guys around PrEP. Therefore, not many trans guys know about PrEP. And I think that's a very important conversation, which goes back to sexuality and how fluid it could be, because those same risk factors are the same. And for whatever reason, trans men tend to get grouped still into sexual health with females and think that we have the same risk factors. But what about the trans guys that date gay men and have gay relationships? They are in an MSM relationship. Therefore, they have the same risk factors as any other cisgender guy. And so PrEP is a conversation that needs to be more prevy, because that could save lives. There are trans guys that I know that are positive, and I'm sure there are plenty of trans guys that don't know. So that impacts a lot of people.
So that's interesting, because once again, PrEP is pre-exposure prophylaxis. It is the taking of HIV medication, one pill once a day. Right now, the regimen is one pill once a day. And if you take PrEP, you are pretty much safe from becoming HIV infected through sex, no matter who you have sex with. PrEP is a game changer as it relates to HIV prevention. And people at risk for HIV should think about being on PrEP at the very least. Many of them should be on PrEP. And if we got people on PrEP, if we got enough people on PrEP, we actually can end the HIV prevention, the HIV epidemic throughout the country. And so PrEP is a game changer as it comes to HIV prevention. And having heard all of that about what PrEP is, what do you think are some of the challenges of trans men getting on PrEP, especially trans men who date cisgender men or trans men who date trans women. Those are trans men who should at least have knowledge about PrEP or think about being on PrEP. What do you think, having heard what I just said about PrEP, what would hinder trans men from getting on PrEP?
I mean, the PrEP is something that a lot of trans men don't know about, and getting the word more out there and involving more trans men to the knowledge of PrEP. Like, I got to know about PrEP when I was working for an HIV and AIDS center. I didn't know about PrEP prior to that, and I got to know what was PrEP and how you get to know and study about taking it. Prior to that, I had no knowledge of it. And there's a lot of trans men out there that had no idea they can get on it. So I think that it needs to be more visible, and more centers, doctors, and stuff should be offering to trans men when they go into their clinics and doctor sections.
Can I build on that, Derek?
Yeah, go ahead.
In order to talk about PrEP, I think one, you have to now have a conversation about your sexual activities. And for a lot of guys, just their identity alone is a tough conversation. So now I have to tell you who I have sex with and how I have sex and what parts I use. So I think having a conversation with our community, ourselves, and letting each other know, like, it's okay to be yourself, it's okay to like what you like, and us kind of affirming each other, it might need to start there, because the shame is what's going to stop guys from getting PrEP.
What do you want to tell young trans men who are struggling with issues of transition and visibility?
I want to tell the young trans men that when you question or you don't understand or you don't know what it is or who it is that you are, that brings about stress and anger, frustration, depression, and the only thing that you're trying to do is become happy. So you have to take those first steps to finding your happiness. And you have to, if you're worried about what other people are going to think of you, maybe those people aren't supposed to be with you throughout your journey.
There you have it. We have had the conversation about trans men. Now it's your turn. Have the conversation. And together, let's stop HIV in Atlanta.